Hello and welcome to All for United. It's another episode of United Daily, and today's a bit of a special one because we've been lucky enough to get some time to record with Feehely, who is responsible for quite a few of the scout reports you would have seen out there if you've done your research on Jules Kounde. He writes about La Liga and he writes a lot about Spanish football as well. Alan, how are you doing? And thank you for joining me today.
I'm good, Ben. Thank you for having me on the show.
Right, no worries at all. And I'm looking forward to this. We've done a few player profiles recently, but they've more been about players who I've never seen play. And I said this to you when we originally spoke. What I saw of Kounde, what I saw of him last year in the Europa League, there was a lot of hype about him going into that little Europa League tournament at the end of last season. A lot of clubs looking at him, one of which we know in the end went in for him, being Manchester City last summer. And I was in my head, I was watching him, and I just wasn't really that impressed with him. He wasn't he responsible for 3 fouls in 3 games that led to penalty, or was it 2 that led to penalties? I thought against United he didn't look that great. So I'm looking forward, Alan, to hearing from you about his progress over the last 12 months and that promise you've seen in him, and sort of why he might be that perfect centre-back for Harry Maguire. But I think, prejudging him aside, let's start right now at Jules Kounde. What he's great at, what makes him that defender that warrants that 70 million price tag. Please tell us a little bit about him.
Yeah, sure thing. Well, just first of all, on the penalty situation from last season, that was actually Diego Carlos who's giving away penalties against Wolves against Inter Milan. Yeah. And actually, it's funny you mentioned that because he was actually the highly touted one going into that European run, because before lockdown, he was the man who everybody kind of pinned their hopes on and stuff. But then after lockdown, Kounde came out of the blocks kind of as a really top pro and kind of showed this almost like kind of tranquility and kind of serenity of minds at the biggest stage that really set him apart from Diego Carlos as maybe the best centre-back Sevilla has to offer, and as a really kind of, hotly pursued young player as well, because he's only 22. He's 6 years younger than Diego Carlos. He was 21 during that European run, whereas Diego Carlos is 27. And I think it's kind of hard because he's not a player with maybe an outstanding attribute that you can pin upon. Like, he's not especially fast. He's not especially great in the air. He's not especially strong. But like, for me, what is the best thing about him is his mentality and his ability to stay cool under pressure. Like in Spain, the Spanish press often refer to him as being cold-blooded because he's able to kind of, saunter forwards and take on players, as we saw against Barcelona in the Copa del Rey last week, while also maintain his defensive responsibilities. And he does so in a way that's extremely elegant. So I think personally that he's an extremely talented player, and I think there's so many facets to his game that he can only develop and improve.
When we're talking about a partner for Harry Maguire, the attributes that stand out that we need in that player is someone who can move the ball quickly, someone who's got a bit of pace, very good in the recovery, and is strong, knows how to stand up a defender and isn't afraid of not going to ground sometimes in situations. Because I think at times, I'm going to refer to Bailly, I'm going to refer to Lindelof, and I'm going to refer to another target that we was potentially looking at before he went to Bayern in Upamecano. I feel like they are all players who potentially sometimes make the wrong decision in key moments when recovering. What have you seen of Jules Kounde when it comes to him and having that player next to him? We mentioned at the start, Carlos, who I wrongly got mixed up for at the start of the show. What a brilliant start that was. But still, do you think that it was the case that Carlos is getting the best out of Kounde, or do you think Kounde is getting the best out of Carlos? For a young lad to be able to do that, it's quite a statement.
I think it's a very good partnership, to be honest, because they have different qualities that kind of complement each other. Because Diego Carlos is a really strong guy, he's a real kind of bull, you could say, but he is prone to making rash decisions and kind of breaking forward when he shouldn't, maybe. Although I think that his name was kind of besmirched a bit by those mistakes he made last season, and his reputation took knocking unjustly because of that, because he's a very, very good player in my opinion. But I think their partnership is actually maybe one of the best in Spain, if not in Europe, genuinely, because they complement each other so well. I remember, for instance, in the Wolves game, Raúl Jiménez kind of was played through on goal, and Kounde managed to kind of come across and cut him off and win the ball in a way that was just so stylish and so cool that it was quite remarkable, And I just thought it was really kind of striking because it went a bit viral. I thought it was like a very, very kind of impressive and unique piece of defending, you could say. But then also speaking about Sevilla, you see the setup of Sevilla really helps Kounde thrive because it's a very balanced setup. Now, last night less so because I thought even Rakitic was kind of overrun against Borussia Dortmund. The setup wasn't correct. And then as a result, centre-backs got exposed. And also, of course, they're playing against, Jadon Sancho, who's a serious talent, and the phenomenon of Erling Haaland. But I thought that, normally for Sevilla, what would happen is you've Fernando Regis, the former Man City defensive midfielder, will kind of sit back and drop in between Carlos and Kounde to free the fullbacks, who are normally, last season was Reguilon and Navas. This season is predominantly Marcos Acuna and Navas. Or what can also happen is they'll actually go to like a 4 at the back, because Fernando will sit in for Kounde and Kounde goes forward. Mm-hmm. It's almost like, it's quite remarkable. Like, he's kind of actually got the second most touches in the opposition box for centre back in La Liga, behind Sergio Ramos only. And regarding his passing is good, if not spectacular. I think it's about 86% is his completion rate. He's not a great passer of the ball in terms of not launching it long. That's mainly more Diego Carlos's remit. He's good at launching the ball over the top. But Kounde is very, very kind of concise and clever on the ball. He uses it very well, and he's very rarely caught out. So I think that, their partnership works very, very well. They complement each other very, very well. And also it works well in relation to the wider team that he's playing in. Do you know what I'm saying? So I think that he has the intelligence to kind of almost vibe with whoever he plays with, really. I think he's very kind of good at that.
It sounds like at Sevilla he's got a platform to flourish there. It really brings the best out of him. Having that person shielding him, a little bit more experience, and the attributes that Carlos has, Diego Carlos has next to him, sounds like that gets the very best out of him. But still, you describing there about his job and what he does, you can't do that job within that Sevilla team at such high level of football as well, without having a great footballing IQ. It sounds like he is a defender at heart, and he has that great IQ at such a young age.
Yeah, definitely. Like, first and foremost, he does love defending, So while he is a ball-playing centre-back, you could say he does love defending, and he's very, very good at defending. He's very, very good at stepping up from the back and kind of stepping into challenges and winning the ball and being assertive when he needs to be, but never recklessly, never to an extent that he abandons his post and kind of opens up space to be attacked, Like, he's never pulled out of position. So in a funny way, you could say that, both Carlos and himself are stoppers in the way that maybe you could consider Harry Maguire to be, but Kounde never allows it to get to a place where he gets caught out of position. So I think even if he was playing with Maguire, I'm not what's the word? I'm not like
tempting fate.
No, not tempting fate, but I'm not pushing him to move to Manchester United.
Right.
I'd love to see him stay in Spain. I'd love to see him stay with Sevilla, but I think that were he to play alongside Harry Maguire at Man United, he'd be able to adapt and learn how to play with him, because he has the ability to step forward and make challenges while also covering. So I think he's a very, very well-rounded kind of centre-back, if it makes sense.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point to hit on. I'd like to hit on. Obviously, with these player profile shows, we're not saying that this player is coming to join United. We're not saying that it's going to happen, but it's always nice to hear about other players within other leagues, at other clubs that potentially, United fans around the world don't watch regularly. They only get a YouTube compilation to watch. It's nice to be able to build a bigger picture about these players, where they're at right now in their careers, where they're going. They're good, they're bad. And to really be able to paint a picture of the player that if United did go in for him, this is the player you get, because you can only learn so much watching those compilation videos. So to hear this stuff firsthand from you is absolutely perfect for any football fan out there, not just United fan, football fan out there, because obviously you watch him week in, week out, and you've seen him grow. The one thing I did want to hit on before we go into a little bit deeper about, his progression over the last 12 months, is you mentioned Harry Maguire, so it's naturally for me to ask the question. If, for instance, Kounde was a target for United, the money was paid, and he did come to the Premier League. I suppose the question I want to ask is a bit double-barreled. Is A, do you think his style is suited to the Premier League? Because obviously we've seen with defenders, it can take time for them to get used to the way that the Premier League's paid, the ferocious speed, and the different types of football that you see within the league. There's so many different football cultures within the Premier League. But also additionally, do you think that Harry Maguire is a good partner for Kounde? Do you think that partnership could work well? We've heard recently from Gary Neville, who says that Maguire's problems Lindelof, Lindelof's problems Maguire. Well, we need to make sure now that Maguire complements that other centre-back, and the other centre-back complements Maguire. So could Kounde, have you seen enough of Maguire, of United, and of Kounde to say that would actually be a nice fit?
Yeah, I think that, Kounde is the kind of player who will adapt to whatever situation he's in. So I think that whoever signs Kounde, and I think he will leave Sevilla in the next if not this summer, maybe the summer after. I think he's that good to go to that the elite of the elite, you could say. I think that he'll adapt no matter what. I think that whoever buys him will have a centre back for the next 10 years, a top class centre back for the next 10 years. But there's no doubt that it's a big physical switch to go from La Liga to the Premier League, especially when you're a centre back, and especially when you're a centre back in the short size, 5'10". So he's not exactly a tall centre back. So there's definitely going to be a period of adaptation there, and it's definitely going to be hard given the way he plays and how kind of intimately linked it is with the Sevilla system for him to adapt to a new system, and also the kind of way he plays in terms of taking risks, calculated risks, but risks nonetheless, and kind of breaking forward and kind of using the ball quite differently to the way other centre backs use it. But I think there's no doubt that eventually he would learn and develop. And regarding playing alongside Maguire, I think it would be a very good partnership, to be honest, because I think that Maguire is so schooled in the British game and so schooled in kind of the values of the British game and the way to play in England, you could say, that he really kind of helped coach Kounde through it. And he helped Kounde develop kind of a knowledge of the league, of the attackers he's facing. And I think there's no doubt if you compare it to Eric Bailly or Victor Lindelof, that he'd be the better partner for him. He'd be a better centre back because he's such a high level of intelligence. Like, I know I'm hammering on about it, but I think it's his mental side of his game is what kind of makes him stand out to everybody else, because that's what makes him learn and develop in the way he has. And like, also even, in terms of his being as a man, like he spent lockdown by himself completely focused on his game in Seville. Basically, he had no family with him, no entourage. He was just completely alone, training hard, working out, learning Spanish. He's a fluent Spanish speaker. He can give 10, 15-minute answers in Spanish without blinking. Like, it's kind of very, very rare for a player to be like that, to be honest, when you're only 21, 22 years old. Yeah. And he's only going to get better. Like, because, as a centre backs, like when you're 22, you're a baby. So when you get 25, 26, 27, I think he's going to be one of the best in the world.
I think that's also really important when you're buying a 22-year-old and a young defender out of another league, is that actually they've shown intent in the past to adapt to the situations they're in. And also that just raises their ceiling substantially. Like, and we'll talk about it now. He's not the finished article yet, is he? Over the past 12 months, he's come a long way, and he's still got a long way to go as well, despite the quality that he's clearly showing. So please, if you could just in some words, like sum up for as someone who's watched him week in, week out, what you've been most impressed that he's added to his armoury over the past 12 months, because he has definitely come a long way, hasn't he, over the last year?
Yeah, definitely. Because even when he signed from Bordeaux, first of all, he was never really highly touted at Bordeaux. He was always considered to be a good player, but never of the top tier of young French centre backs like Upamecano, for example. He was always considered to be kind of a rung below that, and he's never been cap of the French first team squad either. He's only been an under-21 international. So when he signed for Sevilla from Bordeaux, after maybe I think it was 2 seasons in the first team in France, he was signed for 25 million euros. And I spoke to a French journalist, and he said to me that, like basically what I just said there, that he's never really that highly rated when he was in France. But when he was signed, Monchi was asked, like, how are you spending this much money? Because you're normally so frugal and so clever and so spendthrift. How can you spend such a big fee on an unproven 21-year-old centre back from Liga 1? And he kind of said, don't worry. He said, this guy will make it back. and I think, as I said earlier, the way he did was evident because before lockdown, he was kind of often playing at right back sometimes when Jesus Navas was rested in the Europa League or something. And it was actually Sergio Gomez and Carlos were the first choice centre back pairing. But then after lockdown, especially, it was clearly Kounde. And then by the end of the season, Kounde was arguably the best centre back they had. So I think that kind of ability to rally to expectations and to rally to kind of almost disappointments really speaks a lot to his mentality and his ability to adapt. And just on the ball, I think, on the pitch, I think what's developed basically has been his decision making. I think it's been very, very good. His ability in the air has improved a lot. And his ability playing the ball
for a small guy, that's important, really, isn't it? Because he needs to make sure that he's triggering that jump right and is able to compete with obviously big strikers. And obviously we know Seville as a team in general and as a defensive unit struggled, against Haaland and against that Dortmund attack. It wasn't just, Kounde. You'd say that the whole back line didn't particularly deal with it very well. And obviously, when you're a team, you defend as a team and you attack as a team. So that's important, isn't it? Especially coming into Premier League, you've got that physicality to be able to compete for headers, because we've seen firsthand at United, we are so vulnerable from set pieces. It's unreal.
Yeah. I think he wins like between 60 and 70% of all his aerial duels, which is pretty good for a player of his size. Like,
5'10", yeah.
5'10", and his jump is actually phenomenal. Like, he's a big basketball fan, and his jump is just really, really, really good, really impressive off the ground. I mean, but just going back to the Dortmund game, like, I wouldn't blame the backline for that. I know BT did, apparently. I heard about this, that they tore into Kounde and Carlos because they love to kind of kind of almost like deconstruct the next big thing. But in my opinion, it was the midfield's fault that they were exposed in that way, like Rakitic especially. But when they switched it in the second half and Guedes was brought in, I thought they dealt with them much, much better. And they're set up well going to the second leg. So I wouldn't make a judgment on his performance against Haaland until the second leg is done and dusted, because I think the first leg was a bit of an aberration.
I also said that, by the way. You can't judge a young lad like Kounde's whole career so far and his potential and where he's come from on one half of football, more or less. That's so blindsided. It's unreal. And again, it's a reason why you do shows like this, because depending on what you watch and what you read and who you listen to, you're never going to get a real clear picture of how good a player is, especially at the age of 22. So we've heard a lot from you about his good and his strengths and how he might partner Harry Maguire. But let's look at this quite bluntly. What about things that he needs to improve on? What takes him to that next level to be that regular and that first player on the team sheet in France's defence? What takes him to that next level to reach the heights that maybe Diaz has done at City this year?
Yeah. Well, it's funny that you mentioned Diaz, because Diaz was signed as a backup to Kounde. Because he tried to sign Kounde and they couldn't get him because Sevilla weren't budging from, I think it was a 70 million valuation last summer, and Barca and City offered 55. It just shows their confidence that he was going to improve and develop and be worth more the next transfer window, and they've improved right in that. But yeah, I mean, I think the French thing is interesting because that's a clear way of judging his progress. And I still think even he won't make it into the squad until after the Euros, because just the way Deschamps has his team settled and stuff. But, if I was to break his game down and kind of say, what could he improve on? I would say maybe his distribution could be a bit better in terms of playing more ambitious passes and kind of taking on the mantle that Carlos has of knocking balls over the top and kind of knocking balls into the channels. I think he could be better with his long-range passing, because his short-range passing is kind of tidy and solid, but maybe the penetration of his long-range passing could improve. And then also I would say, he could continue to improve in his heading game, because if he is going to England or if he is going to another league that's quite physical, he needs to, respond accordingly. Although he has put on a good deal of muscle. Like, since lockdown, he's put on quite a few kgs of muscle onto his frame, which is also natural when you're developed, when you're 22, 21. You're always going to be lighter than when you're 25, 26, when you've had years and years of accumulated training and stuff. So I wouldn't say there's any glaring flaws in his game, really. There are only kind of small things that would take him from being a good defender to a really great and elite defender, because I think he really is genuinely, without hyperbole, and everybody in Spain would say the same, that he's one of the best defenders in Spain, if not in Europe. Like, as an individual defender, he's really is. It's almost like, the Spanish press are going mental today about Haaland and Mbappe, as you'd expect. And the whole kind of headline, the whole precipice they were saying was that the future is already here. And I think that with Kounde, that's the case as well. I think he's in that kind of generation of players who are kind of really stepping up and taking over the mantle left by the guys of the previous generation. And they're not going to need 5 years development. They're here and they're ready now.
Couple more questions before we get your prediction on what the summer might look like for Kounde and Sevilla's situation at the moment, whether they sell or don't sell at this point, coming to the end of his second season there. Just quickly, so the other player that United were heavily linked with, and nearly every elite club in Europe were linked with, was Upamecano. Obviously they're both young French defenders, but for you, when it comes to Kounde against Upamecano, and you have a look at their qualities and you have a look at where you think they're going to go, whose ceiling's higher? Who do you think has the potential to really cement themselves as France's first choice centre-back? Because it looks like those two are going to be the two that are going to either be batting it out or partnered together for the future of that French defence.
Yeah, well, I think, I did a piece for Squawka before Christmas, and it was kind of a statistical breakdown of Kounde in comparison to other young centre-backs of his age. And the two players who I compared him with statistically who were both under 23 were Joe Gomez and Upamecano. And, they're quite a similar breakdown statistically, but they kind of differed in certain areas. But, to be honest, I wouldn't watch enough German football to be able to kind of authoritatively answer that. I don't know Upamecano as well as Kounde, so I'll naturally be biased towards Kounde.
Let me rephrase the question then for you, Alan. What's the limit for Kounde? Is the sky really the limit? Where do you expect him to go, and what are your hopes for him over the next up to 5 years, let's say?
Yeah, I think that footballers are footballers, but too little is made of their personalities.
Mm-hmm.
And I just think that Kounde has a personality that just is going to only help him and help him develop in a way that's phenomenal, because not only is he kind of a serious guy who's kind of very focused in his work and focused on developing as he's shown in the past and kind of studious on and off the pitch, but he's also a kind of a fun-loving guy. Like, he's very, very popular in the dressing room. There's a funny thing I remember I tweeted recently enough. It was Youssef En-Nesyri, who's been banging in the goals for Sevilla recently, but every single goal celebration you see, it's always Kounde like on his shoulder, jumping on top of him. And I was kind of almost saying, like, in the tweet, I was like, En-Nesyri's goals don't count unless Kounde is on his shoulder celebrating with him, and that's the kind of character he is like. And even when En-Nesyri scored a hat-trick against Real Sociedad, Man United's opponents this evening, maybe a month ago or so, a few weeks ago, he was kind of tweeting, put respect in his name and stuff like that. Like, he's really invested in his teammates. So I think that this kind of, he's a triple threat because he has the raw attributes to develop into a top class center back, a world class center back. He has the mentality in terms of the cold-blooded, calm, tranquil, kind of killer mentality, you could say. But he also has the warmth that kind of sets him apart from other players and will in time turn him into a really, really good leader. So I just think that he has all the tools, in my opinion, to be the best center back in the world.
I also think that his stepping stone is really good. Like, obviously, he's come from Bordeaux, and although he wasn't that highly rated at Bordeaux, he still played something like 40 games in his final season for Bordeaux. And then obviously he's come to Sevilla and he's played nearly every game really since breaking into the first team during his first season. He's got in the Europa League squad of the year. He's highly rated in Spain. So what are the press actually saying about him in Spain? Because there's some great defenders in Spain. Even the other day when there was the press were reporting United's defensive shortlist that they've got for this summer, and it was Varane was the first name on that list, and it was Kounde. Like, Pau Torres keeps being mentioned with United. There's a lot of really good defenders in Spain. So what's the Spanish press's opinion of Kounde as a whole?
Well, it's very good, to be honest. I think Alberto Fernandez, who's the kind of the main marca journalist in Seville, he's kind of a very big fan of him, and he really kind of pushes the same thing I'm pushing, basically, that he's a very intelligent and kind of considered and a player with a very high ceiling, basically. But you see, when you're talking about centre backs in Spain at the moment, it's not a normal time to be talking about centre backs in Spain because of Sergio Ramos and the uncertainty around his future. Because every day the Madrid press are updating on, is he going to stay? Is he going to go? What's the story? How's the contract negotiations going? And that's intimately linked with Pau Torres and Kounde, because they're two of the names in Madrid's shortlist to replace him if he does go. Alongside obviously David Alaba, they're the three kind of major players, and Diego Carlos too is actually also on the list. So I think it's kind of loaded because he's never mentioned now without being mentioned in relation to Sergio Ramos. That's just the nature of the Madrid press, because they're very much kind of focused on Real Madrid and Sergio Ramos, especially, such a big character. So I think that all the talk in the Madrid press, like, almost they can't mention him without mentioning. It's a bit like, I remember when every last season when. Or 2 seasons ago when Derby County were going on a run under Frank Lampard before he joined Chelsea, and it was always Frank Lampard's Derby County, or now it's Wayne Rooney's Derby County. Well, now it's almost Real Madrid target Jules Kounde. That's just the way they speak about him in Spain.
It's interesting though, isn't it? Again, like, the player Sergio Ramos is, the leader, the experience, the qualities that Sergio Ramos brings, the fact that he is on that shortlist potentially to replace him, I think goes to show how highly Madrid rate him and think of him as a big player for the future. Although I personally think that Alaba is going to end up there. It's just whether they add another centre-back there, because obviously with Alaba, they won't need to pay a transfer fee. It will be a lot of wages, as we know, but getting Sergio Ramos off, I still think Sergio Ramos is a wage play. Just every time you see a player like Sergio Ramos linked with United, they want a new contract, and it's one of those. It's going to be interesting, but I don't know. I've always said I've loved Sergio Ramos at United. I've always said it, but that was 2 to 3 years ago when potentially he still had a lot more to give. now I really think that Maguire is a stalemate in that United defence. Wan-Bissaka's a future and a stalemate in that defence. Shaw at the moment is turning it on. He's not going anywhere. That big hole in the middle of our back line doesn't need to be filled by experience. I feel like it needs to be filled by someone who has the potential to go on and be better than everyone else around them in the defensive positions. So that's why for me, I never thought Upamecano was a person. I don't rate him highly enough. I don't think he complements Maguire. He doesn't know how to stand up a defender. His footballing IQ isn't as good. And from everything you said to me, Kounde sounds like one of the best on the market. Pau Torres potentially as well, because from what I've seen of him, he's really good. But potentially Kounde just has the edge. But we've got to talk about it. They nearly let him go in the summer. There was a big bid in for him. What can you tell us about? Tell us a story of what happened with City.
Well, basically, City obviously wanted to move for a centre back last summer. They brought one in Ruben Diaz in the end, and he's been a phenomenal success. Of course, he's a very, very good player. Very different profile to what I'd say is a normal kind of City centre back, but he's complements Stones very, very well. But yeah, basically they kind of came looking for him, offered 55 million euros. Sevilla said no. It's at least 70 million euros. I think Guardiola actually spoke to Kounde, and Kounde was interested in going, as you'd expect. City are a real top club, and Guardiola's a top manager. But he didn't push a move. And the whole point for Kounde was that he knows he's in excellent hands in Monchi, the director of football, who's not just the director of football. He's not just somebody who signs players. As Sid Lowe said many times, he's the guy who creates an environment where players succeed. He looks after their every need, basically, in a sporting sense and in a personal sense. And in Julian Lopetegui, he's a coach who is really, really intelligent in terms of coaching defenders and building defenses and building structures that enable them to flourish. So I think there was no doubt in his mind that while a move to City would have been interesting, he didn't need to do it now. He had plenty of time to do it, to make that move he wanted in the future. And he knew that he could develop well, staying at Sevilla. And then also, I think, from the club's perspective, they knew he was going to get better and they knew his market value was going to increase. So they had no intention of, I think it's remarkable if you think about it, turning down a 55 million euro bid in a deflated market is some sign of confidence. In a market where transfer fees are, minuscule by comparison to previous years, Sevilla had an easy win in front of them. They turned it down. So that says a lot. And I think both the player and the club have their heads screwed on really tightly and they know what they're doing. So they're not going to do anything rash, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I think he's come on a long way this summer, this year, and I think that's been justified. He was so young; he didn't need that transfer there and then. The transfer is going to come because, as we've said earlier on, his ceiling's so high that he just keeps getting closer and closer to it. And if he keeps making those improvements and working hard, like you've said, then he's only going to get better and better as a footballer. And he's not even at his peak yet. I mean, that's what's frightening, is he's not at his peak yet. So let's hope, obviously, whatever club that he goes to, and if that is United, he's given a platform to be as comfortable and to have as much success to be able to try and get to that point of when he's one of the best defenders in the world at that club. I do think it's massively interesting if City go back in for him in the summer. A Diaz and Kounde partnership at centre-back sounds absolutely frightening. I mean, it talks that they're going to test Dortmund for Haaland as well this summer. If they can get in a World Cup. If your team has Kounde in defence and Haaland up front, you're going to dominate Europe. I think it's as simple as that. I think it's literally as simple as that. But let's talk about Seville. You mentioned there about the chairman. You said deflated market. There's been lots of talks of European clubs, and one of them being Dortmund, who we mentioned earlier on, actually being open to selling some star players this summer because they need to make back some money that's been lost. Where are Sevilla? Will they need to sell players this summer?
No, they don't. They're very well run. They live within their means. They made a profit last year during a pandemic. Of course, that was inflated by the Europa League win and the Champions League qualification. But no, there's a very, very well-run club who live within their means, but at the same time, part of the model is selling players. They sell players when they believe they reach peak market value for them, and bring in other young, hungry players. So they'll keep going as they are. They're a bit like Dortmund in that regard, in the way they kind of develop players, and their model is quite like that. And it's kind of difficult because in Spain, to become a big dog is very, very hard. Because just how strong the big two are, especially. I know Atletico as well, but I think that Atletico's kind of historical growth has been a long time coming, you could say, in terms of the size of the club. It's very difficult for any other club to compete with the big two. Even though Sevilla are doing it in a sporting sense this season, it's a season where Madrid and Barcelona are very much at the low ebb, so I think it's quite difficult for them to maintain that kind of forward momentum for a significant period of time. I think their goal is to make the top 3 a top 4 and kind of really solidify their place in that top 4. And they have done that. They finished 10 points clear of Villarreal last season. They're on course to do so again this season. They've really pulled away in the last few months. I think that's their main challenge now, is to kind of make that top 4 kind of locked down, to use an unfortunate phrase.
So what amount of money gets you Jules Kounde this summer if you wanted to sign him? Is it the reported 70 million euros that apparently is still being put out there, or do you honestly think it would end up being more? You'd potentially add-ons to push that up now that he's at the position he is at.
Yeah, I think it would definitely be minimum 70 million anyway. I think, the most likely scenario would probably be 70 million up front with add-ons and stuff worked in and performance-related clauses. And then even potentially a 90 million clause if there's a bidding war happening for him, because, of course, United have been linked with, so of Liverpool have been attached to him. Real Madrid have been attached to him. Man City could still go in from, who knows, there's several clubs in for him and interested in him. I think there's so much to be played in the centre-back situation this summer, because depending on where Alaba goes, depending on what happens with Sergio Ramos, we know that Upamecano is going to Bayern Munich, that's done deal. But aside from that, there's still a lot to happen, because I think, as you mentioned earlier, if Ramos does go and they still bring in Alaba, there's still uncertainty over the Rafael Varane situation and whether they might bring in another centre-back on top of that, because Varane is kind of unhappy if, Alaba comes in earning the money he's supposedly earning. I think it's 21 million euros net per season or something. That's quite significant. Then, he's going to say, okay, I want to bump too. I've won 4 Champions League titles for you. I won a World Cup. And then he could leave off the back of that and then spark another move in the window. Do you know what I'm saying? So it's kind of, there's quite a lot of factors in play for anything to be decided as of yet, I think,
Well, and Varane, again, United may play a part in that happening, because, again, if you look at the names linked, Varane could be that name that's linked to United, and he has been off and on quite a few times. For me, I don't watch a lot of Spanish football, but from what I've seen of Varane, he's just not mobile enough to be next to Maguire. You need someone who's mobile, on their toes all the time. I know he has some fantastic speed for such a big guy, Varane, but again, I worry about his mobility, and I think that we shouldn't be buying a player for the sake of them being available. We need to buy that player to partner and complement Maguire and the players in front. Otherwise, there's just no point in even going back into the market for a centre-back. So, yeah, I look forward to see what happens. But, Alan, say, for instance, that 70 million euros is spent by any club, if it's United, by any club. 70 million euros is a big price tag for such a young lad. So what would you say to those fans out there who look at that price tag and go, is he worth the investment or not?
Well, I think there's no such thing as a sure thing in football. But as Monchi said when he was questioned over spending 25 million euros for him, just wait and see. And that's what I'd say to those fans. I said, just wait and see. Because I have faith that he's going to go right to the top, to be honest. Because I just without harping on about it, he is properly cold-blooded on the pitch. He's a killer. He's the way he plays, the confidence he has in himself.
Has he got a bit of aggression about him as well? Is he a bit of a
it's like a cool aggression. Cool aggression.
Okay. Like the Martial, he's really pissed off, but that little smile means he's dying. The next chance he gets, he is getting you.
Yeah, it's a bit like, I don't know if you saw Mbappe yesterday. He told Jordi Alba he'd kill him in the streets. Yeah. Well, they're both from Paris. Kounde's from Paris too. So I like, he's just a cool dude. I really like him as a personality and as a footballer. And I have done for a long time. Ever since I first saw him, I just noticed something different in him. Just some players, something different about them. I just think he has that.
Yeah. Well, Alan, as you know, and if you've been watching this now, hit a like on this video, by the way, share it far and wide. If you want to learn more about Jules Kounde, the person to ask is Alan. As I said, he's responsible for quite a few scout reports out there that you would see. So, Alan, if anyone wants to go and read some of your work on Jules, maybe you can reshare it once this video has gone out. Could you tell them where they can find you?
Yeah, definitely. So on social media, it's on Twitter, it's Azul Feehely, so at AZULFEEHELY. And then that's most of my work is available there. I work for, La Liga Lowdown, Football Espana, World Football Index, do bits for Squawka, These Football Times, various other places too. So Kounde is often close to at the moment, especially, he's quite a hot topic. So I'm speaking about him and writing about him a lot. And I have various things that I've done in the past about him, and I'm kind of been resharing them as the weeks roll by. So you can catch it all there.
Maybe next week or in a couple of weeks' time, we should do another one of these, but on Pau Torres. Because again, he's a player who I've watched a bit and who's been linked with United, but I don't know an awful lot about him. So maybe we'll have to pick your brains on him as well, or see anyone who you'd recommend for us to get on to talk about Pau. Because I think, I think there's, as you say, I think it's really interesting. There are quite a few. I've always said that I feel like we're in an era where there's a real lack of extremely high quality defenders. And what I mean by those is like those old school, defenders who only care about defending. They couldn't give a crap if they can't string two passes together, but they can react, they can challenge, they can win the ball, and their IQ is just all about stopping the opposition from scoring. And that's, so to speak, their main focus. I feel like there's a lack of that type of defender. And I think actually La Liga at the moment probably has the most defenders with that attribute. I think Pau Torres sounds like one, Kounde sounds like one. Obviously, you've got Ramos in there who's one of those defenders. Still think Varane is potentially one of them too. And again, I'm probably missing a loadout as well because I'm not so to speak familiar with it. But in the Premier League, I feel like you've got, I think Wan-Bissaka's one of them, although he plays right back. Fantastic on recovery and tackle. He's a great defender. I think, you've got Van Dijk. I think Tyrone Mings is one of them. I think Diaz is one of them. But apart from that, there's no real high quality defenders that you think could go into a team and be the best in class in their position. And I definitely think that from what you said about Kounde, he is getting there. We're not going to put him on a pedestal and say he's there yet, but he is getting there, and he's definitely one of those out there that's got the most promise. So yeah, sorry, I went off on a tangent then, but I just love talking about defenders. Anyway, guys, stay safe. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to the channel. Check this out on your podcast platform of choice. Search All for United Daily. We will be back on Monday with a Twitter React show after the Newcastle game. Yes, it's Newcastle Monday, isn't it? Stay safe, people. Take it easy. And Alan, thank you very much again, buddy. Cheers.
Thank you very much. Cheers.